Well, welcome to this episode of The Beat. Last time you heard a little bit of my story. Today we'll be listening to a mother sharing her experience.
Uh, Good morning, everyone. We do want to give you a fair warning that the story that you're about to hear is sensitive in nature, and we do not recommend for children to tune in on this particular episode, as there's a lot of sensitive information that will be discussed or shared, rather, in this episode. Um, if you or anyone that you know needs assistance on resources on sexual assault trauma, you can reach out to the National Sexual Assault Hotline at 1-800-656-4673. National Sexual Assault Hotline, acronym is RAIN, at 1-800-656-4673. And with that, we'll get started with the episode for today.
All right. So my daughter was sexually molested starting at the age of 3. We had her father and I were married, and we had a friend who was the best man in our wedding. He was my ex-husband's best friend, and he was living with us for a while. And he watched my daughter for a few minutes one night when I had to run to the grocery store and pick up something for dinner. I was gone for maybe 10 minutes. And when I got back home, I finished preparing dinner and we were sitting on the couch watching some TV. And my daughter kind of turns to me as she's eating, very nonchalantly says, "Mommy, he put his lady parts in my mouth." And at this point in time, um, she didn't have any other boys in the house. She didn't know what a penis was. So I only talked to her about her body. So her parts were her lady parts, and they were supposed to be private. And so she told me that this man had put his lady parts in her mouth. This man was sitting next to me at the time, and he kind of looked over at me and got up, stopped eating, got up, and walked out to the garage. Um, my daughter's father was home, but he was not in that room and did not hear what was said. So I went and talked to him and told him what was said. And so he went out there and kind of talked to him. And while he was talking to him, I was talking to my daughter a little bit more, as like trying to get more information. Are you sure? Can you describe it? What did it look like? Can you draw a picture? And she did. She drew a picture. She told me that it tasted funny. She told me there was hair on it. Like she at 3 years old saw a penis, and at this point in her life she had never seen one before. Her dad never showered with her. He was never naked in front of her. She had never seen one. So she would draw a picture of it at 3, and she was just very matter of factual with it. Um, and she didn't look like traumatized. She didn't know that it was something bad necessarily, because she didn't try to hide it in front of him. So, as I'm talking to her, and then I'm talking to her dad, um, we 3 years old is kind of the age where long-term memory kicks in for kids. And we were kind of up in the air with if we were going to press charges and have this whole long drawn out, event go on, or if we just told him like he needed to get out and he was never allowed to be around us again. Um, and we took this to her. I was talking to her dentist at this time, and kind of he would have been able to see if there was bruising in her mouth. And so I was kind of talking to him about it. And she did not show any signs of like trauma. Um, but her Dennis was the person who kind of pushed us into pressing charges. Um, at the time, um, her father and I were separating. We were in the beginning stages of our separation and divorce. Um, and ultimately, at the end of this, having this conversation with, her dentist, we had started talking, and he was very, very adamant about pressing charges on this man. And it took about 2 years going to trial in court, and she had to do court prep classes. And it was a lot of, um, it was very traumatic for her to go through and relive it over and over. But it was important for us to kind of bring justice to where we felt like it needed to be done. Um, at 5 years old, she finally had gone into the courtroom and was, berated by his attorney. Ultimately, she was too young at that point to really be on trial. So he was, ultimately let go with no repercussions whatsoever. Um, but because of her age, they basically said there was no statute of limitations that we could bring this up again at any point. Um, it was such a traumatic experience for her needing to go through this part way more than the actual act itself of molestation. So, we decided that we were just not going to bring it up again. We wouldn't talk about it. If she ever brought it up, obviously we would talk to her about it, but she never really did. Um, the dentist and I ended up in a relationship after that. And 4 years later, we um, got married, and he ultimately started molesting her as well. And I did not find this out for probably 6 years, 5 or 6 years after the fact. Um, he had seen that this person was able to do these things. He knew that it was done because kids at that age don't lie about that stuff. Um, typically, kids at any age don't lie about it. I think it's like 1% of children who say something like this has happened is lying about it. Um, but we've realized that it is much more common for people that are in a family dynamic, very close friends, um, that are the ones that are victimizing these kids. And so my husband at the time was feeling very confident that he would be able to get away with this because she had already gone through this very traumatic experience of going through court, and he had children himself, and we had this whole blended family that was so beautiful, and we were very, very close knit. And he knew that she was not going to say anything. He would go into her room and touch her when he thought that she was sleeping, and he would do it almost every single night for years. And we had a very different relationship. He had claimed to be this very religious person, um, and it was a very biblical relationship. We waited for marriage, and after we got married, it kind of continued that way. We did not have a sexual relationship at all, and I just figured that that was him. Um, I had even asked him at one point if he was gay, um, because he was just not a sexual person, with me at least. And you know, hindsight is very 2020, and it's very hard to see how things come to light when you really wish that they were very open, and you know you can see things how they are. But this man particularly was very very good at manipulation, and a lot of the things that he would use as a weapon was the manipulation. He would single out my daughter a lot. We had 5 kids. I had 2 daughters. He had 3 sons, all around the same age, and um, he would single her out of everybody because she was a little bit more stubborn, a little bit more hard-headed, so he felt like he had to break her. But he would he would exclude her from things. Um, he would be a lot more strict with her, particularly. She would be in timeout for so many things, and he would claim to have a degree in child psychology before he went into dentistry. So I believed in a lot of the things that he was doing, as far as like punishment goes. Um, Trusting him that he was going to be able to get through to her, and she was eventually just going to be this really great kid that listened. In reality, she was acting out because she did feel singled out, and she knew what he was doing to her almost every single night. And he would separate her when the boys would not be at the house, so they would come over once a month maybe. When they were not there, um, when she would get in trouble, he would separate her to a different bedroom, or my 2 daughters would sleep in the same bedroom most of the time. Um, when she would get in trouble, he would separate her into the boys' room. Um, every single time that would happen, he was in there. A few hours after she went to bed, when he thought that she was sleeping. There was a few times that he would go in there in like when she was in the her sister's room when they were together, but they were on bunk beds. So he had actually moved her bunk bed from the top to the bottom when we got married and we moved into our house. And that was the biggest like indication for me, because he knew that she was on the top bunk. She was older. She was on the top bunk before, and she was very upset that she was now on the bottom bunk. He did that because it was easier for him to get into the bed with her. Um and that's what he would do, is get into the bottom bunk with her and molest her. um it was years that this was going on, and she never said anything to me. She did say something to a friend who lived in the neighborhood, but she didn't really know what was being done to her was called. So she explained to her friend, like what was happening, and she was probably about 11 or 12 at this point. And her friend told her that, who was a little bit younger than her, by a few months. Her friend told her that it was rape, and she, her friend had told her dad what was going on, and we got a phone call um, from her dad saying that he was going to report um, my husband at the time, and um, because he was raping my daughter. That was so crazy to me because, as I said, he was not a sexual person. We waited for marriage. He was this very like holy church going man. We went to church every single Sunday, and um it was just completely crazy to me that he would rape my daughter and that I wouldn't know about it, that I wouldn't see any kind of signs whatsoever. So we and our biggest mistake was um talking to her in front of him. I had called her dad, and we all sat down. Her dad, my husband, and my daughter. We all sat down together and talked about it. And we said, "This is what was told to us. Is this true?" And of course, with her, the predator sitting right there, she said no, like that never happened. I don't know why she's saying that. Um, she was like, "I've never said anything like that." So, he, my husband at the time, he naturally was like, "Yeah, this is the craziest thing ever. Like, I don't know why she would lie about that." And at that point on, like, I think that it scared him. So at that point, he had kind of stopped doing it. Um, it had come out probably a year, maybe 2 years later, that he was cheating on me. Um, he was in another relationship that um, it was a very, very young relationship. The girl that he was dating was about 20 years younger than him and was a patient of his. And this was kind of a pattern that he had been doing, after all of this stuff came out. And um, my children, my daughter and his son, were kind of talking about this, what was happening. And his son at the time was very used to recording conversations because he felt manipulated by his dad often. He was very good at gaslighting. He had eventually became a diagnosed severe narcissist. Reading up on that was very, very eye opening. And finding everything that was entailed with that. He was very good at hiding things and very good at making you feel that what you saw or what was not the case. Um, he was so incredibly good at it. Like if he was a professional and was paid to do it, he would have been employee of the month. Um, so it was very difficult for children who are easily manipulated to think that something that is done to them was not really done, and what they thought is not the case. Um, so my daughter was talking to her brother about, I can't believe daddy is cheating on mommy, and all the terrible things that they've witnessed him doing. And then she confided in him and opened up to him and told him what he was doing to her. Um, my son at the time, he was recording this entire conversation um, because that's something that he was used to doing for years, was recording things for gaslighting purposes of like, no, this is what you told me. He told my daughter that he was recording it, and he didn't know what to do at that point. He felt like he needed to help her and save her from this situation, but had no idea how to. He was 15 at the time. Um, and it was, something that big is just a lot for somebody that age to deal with and to hold on to. So he told his mother. He told my daughter that he was going to tell his mom, and that she would know what to do. And this was a Memorial Day weekend. We had this huge family event, cookouts, all the things. And it was very different to see these two, particularly because they kind of clashed a little bit, hanging out for several hours just talking. So it was very nice to see them. I wasn't going to bother them. But when it was finally time to eat, I felt bad that I had to interrupt their bonding moment. So I thought. Um, and at that point, like his son was just very in his head. You could tell that he was thinking about a lot of things. He was very quiet. He was normally a quiet kid, but he was more quiet at this point. I did not know that he knew anything about the infidelity. I didn't know anything about the molestation. Um, and, he pulled me aside and said, he's like, Mama, do you and Daddy fight all the time? Is it just when me and my brothers are here? He had decided, my husband and I had decided that we were going to try and make our marriage work. We had been working on it for 2 months at this point. We had started marriage counseling. All his idea. I had told him, when I found out that he was cheating on me, that he could be with her, that I was not going to be a second choice to anybody. And he swore up and down that he didn't want to be with her. He loved me. He loved our family, and he wanted to make it work. So at that point, especially in front of others, we were very good. Um, we showed a lot of affection towards each other. We didn't really argue ever in front of people, especially. Um, so this comment, I was able to say to him, like, we haven't really fought at all during this time. And he was like, I noticed that you haven't fought this time, but most of the time you do. And most of the time it's very one sided. And he's usually yelling at you for very silly things. And I'm trying to defend my husband and tell him, like, this is just how marriage is. We're not going to get along all the time. You know, you just work it out. And he was very adamant, like, yes, but you don't need to be yelled at the way that you are. He knew at that point things that I didn't know. And the next morning we brought the boys back to their mom. And at that point in our relationship, their mom and I did not really talk. That was something that my husband was very adamant about, that we were not friends. We were not friendly with each other. He did not ever want me with them to, like, do pickups and drop off exchanges. um he would speak terrible things about her, so in my eyes she was this really terrible person who is taking his kids away from him. And she was evil in my eyes, and in the eyes of my kids. Um, so I didn't really want to talk to her anyway. But she, this particular time, came up to me and she kind of looked at me and was like, "Hey, are you okay?" And which was very strange, out of the blue. And I was kind of confused. I was like, "Yeah, I'm good. Thanks for asking, I guess." And she just kind of looked at me. There was something in her eyes that was like, "No, you're not." And I thought, I don't know how, but maybe she found out that he was cheating on me. Um, but I didn't really say anything. And, my marriage at that time was, just between, or so I thought, me and my husband, and we were working on things. And, um, at this point, we leave the boys and start driving home, and I get a call from my daughter's father. Um, and he wanted to come pick them up for the night. And him and I have a really great relationship. And if he wants to come get them, he can. He can get them anytime. He said that he had taken off work the next day and he wanted to spend a night with them. So he came and picked them up. And he said he would bring them to school the next morning. And he did. He was there probably an hour later, picked them up, was not out of the blue or anything. Um, but he did look a little bit frustrated. And he didn't really say anything, but he was just really quick about, like, "Oh, we just need to go." And I didn't really think much of it at that point. Um, but the next day, um, I was checking the girls' location. They had little Apple watches. I was checking their location, and they were not at school. they're at one of my friends' houses. And I had contacted her, one of my friends, and asked, like, sent a text message like, "Hey, why are my kids there?" And she did not reply. And so then I messaged their dad and was like, "Hey, are the girls at school?" And he sent me a message saying, "Oh, they were having period cramps, so I came and picked them up and dropped them off at your friend's house." Um, as I was starting to text him back, telling him like they're gonna have to deal with period cramps for the rest of their life. They need to be in school. He calls me and tells me that he was not. He was with our oldest daughter at the magistrate's office down at the courthouse, and basically filled me in on everything that our daughter told our oldest son. And um, he said that he was not going to have the girls back at the house until um, my husband was out of the house. And so that night, I agreed that I would get him out of the house, and it took me about 5 hours to convince him that I couldn't deal with the infidelity. I didn't tell him anything about the molestation that I knew about that. But there was a protective order in place, and I couldn't have him in my house around my kids. So I told him that I couldn't deal with the infidelity and that I just needed a break. Um, and he agreed to leave. Um, Later that night, he tried breaking into the house and was, very aggressive. He tried everything, every manipulation tactic. He tried the aggression. He tried the pity me. He tried, um, you know, guilting me into letting him back into the house when all of his tactics were not working. Um, he tried forcing his way in. I had changed the locks, and so he was not able. And then he called the police. Um, and I didn't answer the door. And the police, asked him, like, why did your wife kick you out? And he was like, there was another woman I was cheating, and the looks on their faces were like, well, you kind of deserve it, man. And they were like, yeah, there's nothing we can do about it, so we're leaving. Um, and it opened up this entire investigation of the molestation charges because there was a protective order, and you have to put down what is in the protective order, like why you need one. And he was served with papers, and on there, says why there's a protection order. And he sends me this text message and pleading with me, please make this go away. I didn't do any of this. You know that she's lying. Um, she's just angry. She found out that, I was unfaithful to you. I'm not doing that anymore. Like we were working on our marriage. Um, it wasn't that wasn't the case at all. He was using all of those manipulation tactics to try and get his way back into the house and take control of the situation to not get in trouble. Um, I was told by detectives because my daughter had to go through a lot of trauma therapy through the state. The state kind of, pushed her into it. We went to CHKD and they were really, really great with her trauma therapy. Um, and she was able to finally get down on paper everything that happened over the past several years. And it took a year of that. I was told I couldn't talk to her about it. Um, they didn't want me to influence anything that she said. So I did not really know the entire picture of everything until almost a year later. Um, I knew little bits like that he was like touching her in the middle of the night and things like that. Um, but I did not know the whole story. Um, Finally, her trauma therapist had had a meeting with her and I, and we would go separate. Each week we went together, but she would talk to my daughter first, and then me. And then she had written down everything for her, and it was kind of a chronological order. From when she was 3 years old, how everything kind of came out, and um, the reasonings, that things happen. It it kind of just falls into place, and you start remembering, circumstances. And yeah, she was singled out a lot, and it always ended up being like in a time where he thought that he was caught, because she would pretend to be asleep every single time he would go in there and touch her. And I knew, because I was her mother, that she was not a light sleeper, or a heavy sleeper. She was a very light sleeper. And he had made a comment one time about how heavy of a sleeper she is. And I kind of was very confused that, like, that's not that's not my kid. Like, she wakes up, you know, if you stub your toe in the middle of the night accidentally on the other side of the house, she'll wake up. And I had even brought her to the doctors a few times during over the course of the few years that we were together, um, because she was not sleeping at night. And it was affecting her school schedule, and getting up for school, and it was causing a lot of fights and things like that. And she just wasn't going to sleep, and she would stay up, and I thought that there was something wrong with her with that. um, there was another time, because he was so adamant about her being in bed and staying in bed, like after bedtime they weren't allowed to come outside to go to the bathroom. They weren't allowed to get, water, nothing. All of the typical things that kids do to, like, stay awake and get out of bed. It was a huge fight. So, they had to get their water and bring it into their room and make sure that they went to the bathroom, and they were not allowed to leave. Um, my daughter was so scared of getting in trouble and leaving. She would, like, pee in jars and cups and stuff in her room so that she would not get in trouble. Um, But, there was a one night in particular that I remember. I woke up, and my husband it was very rare that he went to bed with me. I, worked in a medical industry where I had to be up at very, very early in the morning. I was up at between 4:30 and 5 every day, and would have to be to work by 6:30. Um, and he obviously worked in dentistry, so he worked the typical, like, 8 to 5 work schedule, 9 to 5 sometimes. And so I had to be very quiet when I would leave in the mornings. And I would have to go to bed at a decent time, and he would not come to bed with me often. Um, so that was never something that was out of the ordinary for him. Um, Which we just didn't sleep together very often. He stayed downstairs on the couch and would watch shows or play video games. And there were several times where he would come to bed at like 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and he would always say things like, "Oh, well, I was, just checking on the house. I was checking on the girls to make sure they were sleeping and they were good." And and so that was never something that was out of the ordinary for him. Um, But you have to also keep in mind that he did this the entire time that we were together. Um, but there was one time that I came out of my room because it was 2 o'clock in the morning, and I could hear him downstairs on the couch. And something in me, like, told me to, like, get up and look. And he was downstairs on the couch, and my daughter was with him. And she was kind of like sitting on his lap. And the way that she looked up at me, I can't describe the feeling, but I was kind of confused as to, like, why she was up at 2 o'clock in the morning watching TV with him. And I couldn't make out, like, her face. Like I could tell that she was trying to tell me something, but I thought that it was mostly like, oh, I don't want to be in trouble. I know that I'm supposed to be asleep right now. Kind of look. He had said, oh, she had a nightmare, so I'm allowing her to be up and, I'll put her back to bed here very soon. So for me, it was like, oh, it's a very like endearing and sweet thing that he's doing when he's normally very, very strict with her and is constantly yelling at her and she's constantly in trouble. So, I was like, oh, that's very nice of him to do. So I let it go and went back to sleep, and that was one of the things that she had written down um during her trauma therapy was, he would bring her out onto the couch sometimes, and while he thought that she was sleeping, and he would carry her like a baby, and he would lay on the couch and he would lay her body on top of him and masturbate with her body. He would rub her body against him, and she would pretend to just be asleep this whole time. And that's why he would say that she's a very heavy sleeper, because she didn't wake up. And um, that moment that, like, once that was said, it hurt so bad knowing that I had almost witnessed him doing it, but I didn't. I was not fast enough. I didn't know what was going on. And the look that she was giving me was, please save me from him. Please read on my face what is happening. And I had no idea. I thought that he was being very sweet to her and allowing her to stay up and regather her thoughts and watch something funny after just having a nightmare. Um, so it was very, very challenging to see the the signs, because when you're in the middle of it, you don't notice them at all. Um, but the red flags that now that I've gone through it and she's told me are, out of character things, singling things out, saying things about her that I know wasn't true, like the heavy sleeper. Um, but singling out was the biggest thing. Out of all five of our kids, she was the one that was in trouble the most. And when asked, why she didn't say anything sooner, is she didn't want to ruin her family. She didn't want to see me go through another divorce. She didn't want to see my heart broken. She didn't want to miss her brothers. She knew, they were her stepbrothers. She knew that she was not going to see them again if she destroyed the family. And it wasn't that bad. He wasn't physically hurting her. Um, so she felt that it was okay to just be quiet. And she had planned on saying something after she turned 18. But then she said that she also thought about not ever saying anything until he died. Because when she turned out 18, she was going to move away and she wouldn't have to deal with it anymore. But, what if he started doing it to other kids or like her children one day? And um, if she would have known that her brother was going to say something, she's told me that she wouldn't have said anything, because the trauma that happened after was more than what she was dealing with by being molested. And there's typically no proof of it. People that are predators that prey on children are very, very good about not being caught. And for whatever reason, we don't believe that family members and very close friends will do something like this to our kids, but the majority of the time that is exactly who it's done by. And because of her statement at CHKD, she had to go through, a forensic investigation, and they determined that she was telling the truth based on the questions that they asked, and I was not present for those. Um, the city and the state of Virginia opened up an investigation and pressed charges against him, and that's something that they don't do unless they feel like they really have a case. But that took 3 months to actually go through and arrest him. And he, you know, was arrested and he was in jail for about 5 days before he made bond of one of his friends. And um, he never spent another day in jail again. It was about almost 2 years of trials, pre-trials, and more court prep, talking to attorneys, talking to detectives, building cases. She became um, more of a problem child. Like, she was not wanting to go to school, and she, did not want to go to church anymore. She didn't want to do all of the things that she'd normally done. And she was in trauma therapy, but it's reliving this scenario. She was watching her family crumble in front of her, and that was a very hard part for her, where she wished that she would have just shut up and not said anything. And the justice system does not really help with that. It's something that really needs to be changed. Right now, the justice system is very, very much about saving face for a predator and not necessarily a victim. Innocent until proven guilty is, what is done. And it's it's more traumatizing for kids to go through this whole thing because they don't feel like they are heard. They don't feel like they're believed. They are made to be, you know, they're made to prove what these terrible people have done to them. And it's very hard for them. It's very, very hard for them. And he ultimately pled guilty, but he only pled guilty to sexual battery. He did not plead guilty to sexual battery of a minor, which would have been a felony. Um, so we did not have to go to trial. So the whole part about her is gone. Um, so that it's very hard for kids to stand up and say something because of what happens after. They are not protected. They are made to explain very difficult things that happen in front of strangers, in front of an audience. It's extremely embarrassing. Um, it's very hard for them, and that part is more traumatic than a lot of the things that they go through a lot of times. And we're still dealing with the repercussions of it.
Again, we want to make sure that everybody is taking care of themselves after hearing that story. Next episode, Renata, can you give them a little bit of what we're going to be talking about?
Next episode, we will break apart the story that we've heard today to talk about red flags, uh, what to look for, how to create a safe space for victims to disclose, and when they do disclose, how to respond as you as a friend or as the parent or as a service provider, and where to go um, for help and assistance. Get the victim back into the road of recovery after the crime happens.
And again, I want to say thank you to this mother and her willingness to tell her story so raw and so beautiful. Thank you again. And if you ever have any questions and need anything from us, please give us leave us a comment or subscribe to the channel to hear more. Thank you very much.